This is Colonel Jeffrey H. Fischer, retired, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
Reporting for duty, sir. How are you? Good morning and good evening.
Doing great. How are you doing?
It's always fun. I'm good, man. It's I love to have. One of the things that folks in America miss on veterans is just how damned qualified people are. You know, if you're at a brigade headquarters doing a command and staff meeting, there's probably 2 PhDs in that room. For sure, in that brigade, there's a world-class athlete. There are masters. If you have a master's degree, oh, you're just making like the minimum, right? Like you're an adorable little baby. You know, it's like you can't brag about your resume because there's folks that are peer review published. I mean, it's amazing the qualifications that come into and we're talking to brigade for people who don't know, roughly 5,000 people. So you have a mid-sized company, but look at what happens in terms of credentials for the people who are, I don't know, anybody who's an officer and a lot of people who are augmenting, they are schooled, they're experienced, they're schooled in the thing that they're experienced in. It's really remarkable.
It is. You're 100% correct, and it kind of, I chuckle when you bring this up, right? Because in my last second to last command, I was a defense attaché in Kosovo, and my E9, who ran my shop and he was my OPSCO, great guy, but he had his PhD. he was more educated. Right. He was more educated than I was. He's like, right, like we should reverse roles.
And it wasn't in Southern French literacy, it was in whatever it was, leadership, public policy, something, where that person is just an amazing person. I just had one of the former CX on, Tron Troxel, the senior enlisted person in the entire Department of Defense. And what a brilliant dude, and he's the standard classic military case. He's like, I was going nowhere fast. I needed to do something. And then 38 years later, he's the senior enlisted person in all of the Department of Defense. What an amazing story.
Yeah, I agree.
When you look around a room like that and you're trying to contribute, it can't be about ego, right? It's got to be about the boss's mission, or when you're the boss, you're hoping that everybody's pulling on the rope with you. This is also a bit of an uncommon thing where, you give the boss an option A, B, or C. He says B, internally, some of us go, oh. And then we all go plan B, and we all move forward with that mission. Is that unique to the military, or that unity of effort? Like once we decide, we can go forward and go forward fast.
I do. I think you're right. I think it is actually unique to the military in a sense, right? The military is the only entity that I can think of, if you want to compare it to the business world, where you've got let's say an appreciation tour at the very beginning, which teaches you how to be in the military, right? And while we teach everyone how to salute and what customs and courtesies, what we're really teaching people is how to fail and how to want to succeed and how to get up and brush yourself off. That's what we keep teaching everyone. And that skill set is continually honed, whether you're air, land, or sea, space, it doesn't matter. You and I could probably give example after example where we see someone fail, but they get up and they're like, no, our team is still moving forward. So you're right. You sit around a table and you got your brigade commander and you offer him, 3 courses of action, and he comes back and he says, all right, like you said, we're going with B. And I was like, that's not the one I want. But hey, A, B, and C, we're all going to have the same end state. So maybe right. He didn't choose the highway that I wanted to go down, but we're all going to end up in Fort Lauderdale or Key West, and we're all going to succeed, and we're going to get there. So there's a desire, right? There's that inherent desire. And when you look at you and I are obviously no longer in the military because we both have facial hair below our nose, which means and on our chin, which means we've dabbled in the private sector, right? And to a degree. And the thing that is so frustrating to me about the private sector is there's very devious people, right? Mm-hmm. There's people out there that want to undermine the mission. That they're not dedicated to it, that they're paycheck right. focused. There's myriad reasons that they come around and that they're not in there. They're scoping for another job, they're scoping for their boss's job, or all of that detracts from accomplishing the mission.
Yeah, and I took these two previous questions to set up a place. I've been fascinated by this, and I'm hoping that we can figure out some kind of answer for this. We we like to focus on diversity, but diversity is it's not a perfect antonym for unity, but they are antonyms, right? They don't go the same way. And so the military has this thing where, and I kind of surveyed what a brigade might have, and a lot of educated people. There's going to be a world-class athlete, all these kind of things. Certainly people from as many ethnicities as the America has, like all kinds of people. But we do have that unity of effort, right? You have that leader that coalesces that and says, follow me, and then they go and you follow that. I don't know that you can't just balance the scale on unity, and you can't just stand on diversity and say, this is how you go forward. Because if you're a leader and you're like, I only want diversity, everybody's picking option F. F sub 2 with the appendix B is my option. And that doesn't work, right? So what are your thoughts on balancing the importance of diversity, but also with the unity of effort and a unit that can go and do something?
Yeah, so diversity is a dangerous word, especially when you're on a live podcast. You're trying to sell things, right? Because you don't want to upset anybody. And
yeah, right, of course.
Yeah, and here's where I stand on diversity, right? I believe that the military's efforts with racial diversity and with gender diversity back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s were good things. And I say that because when you look at the population, you have a large percentage of African Americans, a large percentage of Asians, a large percentage of Hispanics. You need these people in your fighting force, right? And half of the U.S. is women, right? Just by the law of men and women. So I had an ambassador, I love him to death. As a matter of fact, I'm going to see him in a couple of days. Ambassador Greg Deloise is my ambassador in Kosovo. And one of my most favorite phrases that he would always say is, it's really hard to win the game when you leave half your team on the bench, right?
Yeah.
So I was a big fan of those diversity efforts, right? Because where you may not be picking the best candidate for a job because of the diversity. Excuse me, that's my dog. But you're gaining, right, a different variable that's really hard to capture, right? It's not quantifiable. So I was good in that. Where I think diversity has kind of taken a bad turn in the military, and I think we're starting to see that the ship steer, and DoD's big, take a long time to turn that ship, is we fell to this notion that a little bit of diversity is good, so a lot of diversity has got to be great, right? And unfortunately, I don't think a lot of diversity. I think we need to pump the brakes a little bit here, right? The transgender community, the LGBTQ community, they're look. I have friends who fall in that community, and we've had these discussions, right? And I said, look, the percentages of you out there, right? They just don't justify this really huge effort that DoD is undertaking. When you're less than 1, 2, 3% of the U.S. population, why am I trying so hard to bring that level of diversity in when I might not only be selecting the best candidate, but also now I'm alienating or upsetting, right or wrong, right? We all have our biases and our prejudices. I'm alienating the people, and you and I are seeing that, right? And so is the U.S. population. We're really having a hard time, whether you're the Air Force or the Army or the Marines or the Navy, to meet your recruiting goals. And this is year on year. So the commercials are changing, right? We're seeing that. And this isn't just, Colonel retired Jeff Fischer talking. The commercials are going back to the shoot 'em up, guns, jump out of the tank, jump out of the airplane, which was effective just a couple of years ago. So hopefully it'll regain. Long answer probably, but that's where I stand.
No, but it's a hard question, and I appreciate you taking the crack at it, because we do want to be better at these things, right? But we don't know what better is. We don't know what the future is, and so you're trying to do this. And look, in our community, we get pretty rough on Miley, like, oh, it's too much, operational capacity, right? But he also, this is important, he is the boss, or he was the boss during his time. Like at some point, he won't be that guy anymore, and so he gets to twist that knob as hard as he wants and say, "This is the mark I'm going to make," and when I'm done, there will always be a little bit at least of that. Even if the next guy comes and twists the knob back the other direction, which is that person's right to do. The boss is the boss, and they pick it, and we can complain about it a little bit, but then we got to get to work on figuring out how to make our military better under this command structure.
Yeah, 100%. Right.
Yeah.
And now we got a new guy, right? You got General C.Q. Brown, who was actually a commander at the Air Force's Top Gun. We call it Fighter Weapons School, right? The Navy School's Top Gun, the Air Force's Fighter Weapons School. So he was an F-16 guy, commander there. I went through in a different program. I went through an EC-130H Compass Call and graduated there. And so I've had my engagements with CQ. He's a brilliant dude. And I think we're in good hands, right? I realize sometimes ground guys or sea guys, they often get scared when they see a blue suitor jump into the chairman job and, think that the air domain is the most important domain in the world. But I think we'll be all right.
I'm glad you brought that up, because it's funny, wherever we're comfortable, no matter how dangerous and complex it is, we're like, yeah, that's where I want to be. I mean, to the point where when I transitioned away from war and everything, and I know a lot of my fellow ground dudes have said this, like, I'd rather be in combat, and I mean getting shot at, than in this situation in life, because life is so different once you get out. And you're right, we all have to look around and go, can this Air Force person, when the first Space Force person steps up at that scale or anywhere near that, we're going to look and go, but the reality is CQ has gone against his peers and risen above, he's been in the front of the pack the entire career, right? And I don't have to know CQ to know that. That's the process. You have to be an alpha amongst alphas at being a lieutenant, at being a captain, at being a current, whatever. So you don't get there without being brilliant, without being well-educated, without having incredible people around you that you're learning from all the time. We lose sight of that as well. Like, yes, some of these generals are political animals, and they're not going to be relevant if you put a stick in their hand or an M4 in their hand. But that doesn't mean that they're not good at their job.
Yeah, true, right? And I get frustrated when I'm in face group or social media chats or on an X and Twitter Spaces and or X Spaces now, or whatever we're calling it. And that you hear the off the cuff comment. Well, the only reason he's the chairman now is because he's a black general, and I get frustrated, right? Because this goes back to your diversity thing. And I said, well, look, there's some generals that made general because they were not white and because they were not males. He ain't one of them, right? Yeah. So he, as you say, right? He did it all by the book, right? He led and was really, he's an effective leader, and it's why he's there.
Yeah. We just the other day we had on a grandson of the first two black generals, the Generals Davis, I call them, and they were incredible. The younger Davis, the younger, was he went to West Point. And West Point ignored him, acted as if he didn't exist. They put him in.
Didn't say a word. Didn't speak.
Yeah,
4 years
at all. It's amazing, right? And then what does he do? He goes out and leads the Tuskegee Airmen and goes on to have this significant career, on the public side. Once he gets out, it's amazing, right? And so we're so far past that, and it's incredible that we have that. And I don't want to get too far down the road on this, because I laid this groundwork because I want to get into the mission capability that we all see with the American military, right? So we have this proxy conflict in Ukraine. We have this, what hopefully stays proxy in the Israeli-Hamas war, but we're also tied in Africa, with our special force type units and everything. So when you look at our capacity, we always wonder, if you recall, like when the commander, right at COVID, at the dawn of COVID, is like, hey, I got to go public because you guys are not paying attention to my problem here. And this is a guy who's capable and knows how to run an entire group of ships, not just a ship. So, but we complained like, you're going to impact our capacity to defend. So when we look at that, have we gotten worse, or are we just complaining because, these things are hard and they're ugly and we have to go do them, but here we are doing it?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think there's some places where we're losing capability. We're bleeding, if you will. But then
Yeah.
there's other places where I look and I'm like, okay, I feel really comfortable with that. Like you look at the new capabilities of the F-35. Hey, that's a pretty kick rear end fighter, right? The B-21 Raider, and you look at that, and I'm like, okay, yep, that's good. It's far cheaper than the $2 billion that we spent on every B2. So we're reining in costs a little bit in the big defense industries. And right now we've got a war that, like as you said, that's going on in Ukraine, and our defense industries are able to grow capacity, grow capability, learn new technology, leverage processes for building. And, you know, in Ukraine, at least they say they're going to pay it back. Right. But, you know, I mean, we can get into the discussion if you want on whose side the United States should be on. I make no bones about it. I'm a huge Ukraine supporter. And there's reasons for that. And we can get into it. You know, I sometimes get frustrated again when people don't realize that, like, if we're building weapons and we're sending them over there, the people that are building them, right, and the people who are making the components and the companies, all those are U.S. So the vast majority of this money goes into American pockets, right? We're not building the weapon in South Korea and then sending it on. So we got to remember that this money is, for the majority, staying in the United States.
This is theoretic, and I am not an economist, but there is truth that because money really is all virtual or digital, if you want to say that, that money is just whipping around at the speed of light all around the planet all the time. And then because we have these contracts, we have like this scupper that's just like capturing it all and shooting it into America, and then it instantly just leaves. Like I just got my my disability drop this morning, you know, from my VA disability. And most of that money's already out the door. You know, it's like it just kind of rested. And it really never sat there. Like in reality, there wasn't someone like pushing the cart and putting my money in, you know, it was there, but really it was accessible and is already accounted for. Like Wells Fargo will send you money in advance of the money that you get every month, right?
Yeah, this is dangerous, right? And how many times have we tried to stop our soldier sellers and airmen from, like, do not fall for that? You know, cash your check 10 days early and then bring
yeah. But you bring up a good point in that money, we see all that money going out, and it is taxpayer money, but a lot of it is coming right back, which is, you know, you have to find ways to divert and pool this money, even if it's just for a microsecond to get it to go on. So you make a great point there. And when we look at the Ukraine fight, I have to also say this. There's a lot of people in DC and a lot of policymakers that have PhDs in this is how the fight in Russia is going to go. And so that's their baby and it's precious. Not saying anything bad about that, but we manifest this shit. Like we make it happen because this is, you know, this is how it's going to go down. I've been waiting for this moment for 40 years, you know, whatever it is. And those people absolutely exist and they push these things forward.
They're there. Yeah. And we could name names, right? I mean, it's that easy.
Yes.
Right? Here's kind of why, and I break it down in layman's terms. I was an operator most of my life, right? I was an aviator. I was lucky enough to do an exchange program with the Navy. So I went out on a carrier for 3 years. And then due to a very weird program, I was selected to be a battalion commander on the ground in Afghanistan under the United States Army.
Wow.
Right. So I did air, land, and sea. Right. So I'm fairly versed. I've been, again, an operator. I've been very blessed. And then I was a defense attaché and then working as a diplomat. So
yeah.
The United States government does an absolutely horrible job, and I give them an F at explaining why the United States people should support Ukraine. Right. Look. Since the end of the Cold War, or since the end of World War II, the United States has bedded down hundreds of thousands, if not by now millions of forces in Europe. UK, Germany, Italy, multiple bases. They weren't there to learn how to like bangers, schnitzel, and pasta, right? They weren't there on an appreciation tour of Europe or any of that. They were there in part because we had an alliance with NATO, right? Our NATO members, and there was a real and present threat to the European continent. in the 90s, we said that there was a word called glasnost. If you're old enough, you remember what that word is, right? And that Russia was no longer our friend, and we slowly started drawing these forces down, but we never really pulled them all out, right? We never stopped.
That's true.
So this notion that Russia is not our enemy is completely fabricated. They've been our adversary for 70, 80 years, and we've kind of kept them in check. Where the United States government also gets an F is, look, Russia has not been the best neighbor to a couple nations in the area, right? It helped carve away a part of Azerbaijan called Nagorno-Karabakh. They carved away part of Moldova called Transnistria. They carved away two parts of Georgia called South Ossetia and Abkhazia. And the international reaction, so I don't blame just the United States here, but the international reaction to all of those was, don't go any farther. Like we didn't do anything. Right. We didn't have alliances with those nations. But we know that the encroachment and growth of Russia and Vladimir Putin was something that he wanted to do. Okay. Then he goes into Ukraine, and now we say enough is enough. I get why Vladimir Putin says, well, wait a minute. The first 5 times I did this, you didn't do jack. Why are you after me now? So I get his kind of his knee-jerk reaction to be a little upset about this. But by the same token, I think where the international community failed was the first 4 times. Like, we should have done something, right? We shouldn't call these things frozen conflicts. And to be fair, I don't live in the United States anymore. You know that I live in Austria, and that's why it's dark here. And you got the sun coming up on one side of your face. I've got it going down on the other side of mine. There's not a lot of Americans. If you say where's Transnistria, South Ossetia, Abkhazia on a map, they'll do. I don't even know. I've never even heard of these countries. Well, they're breakaway regions. They're not really countries. Blah blah blah. But they don't know. I can't fault them for that, right? This is part of we go into the education process of the United States, and that's a whole other discussion, right? So yeah, it's frustrating. So that's why I'm a Ukraine guy. I mean, at some point we have to stop this. I would rather. By the way, my final point on that is I would rather stop it now. And I know that. Look, I'm a warfighter, right? So please don't. This may be a little politically incorrect, but it is not U.S. blood that is spilling right now. I'm pretty concerned when it gets to U.S. blood. That's when, as a commander, I care. I care a little bit. I care a lot when it's U.S. blood, right? But you've got the Ukrainians willing to do the fighting and dying, and all they're asking is for tools.
Yeah,
I'm a fan of that.
I'm not sure we're all that different on this too. I characterize myself as a dove, but don't make me get out of this chair because this dove's got some biceps, right? And I will come out and, when you want to go out and pick on my friends, then we're gonna have a problem. We're gonna have a real problem, and I don't want to put troops on the ground, but I am gonna have you pick from a list of targets and have my buddy Jeff fly his plane over and drop them on there for you. This is happening. You're gonna have to deal with it, but when you do this, X happens. Don't make me get out of my chair again, and that's sort of how I approach these things. And, when folks who lead Islamic countries tweet things against Israel, and they lead these countries religiously, politically, Israel gets to believe them, and we get to believe them along with them, because we also have to nip that in the bud. We let Iran run pretty loose for quite a while. And then they got checked up and they kind of backed off. But I have no problem with Soleimani getting smoked out in Iraq. He played a game with all of us. We all played the same game, same stakes, and that's why he's dead, because he was a combatant and he got combated. So I have no problem with these things. But yeah, don't make us go out and fight, and then don't pick on your neighbors, and don't try to take something that you think you can take because it advantages you and disadvantages, say, Moldova in this case.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing when you say things for shock value, sometimes it works, right? So you got to be careful, right? So if you're going to keep saying things and you love the shock value that you're getting on one end of the spectrum, just be reticent of the fact that on the other end of the spectrum, things can happen. And, when you're the leader of Hamas and you're the leader of Hezbollah and you're saying things like Israel needs to be eliminated from the face of the earth, Israel's going to start believing that, right? There's a lot of people out there that support Palestine. I disconnect Palestinians from Hamas. I don't say they're the same thing. I realize there are ties, But to me, and again, I can detach myself from humanity as a guy who's seen really graphic, horrible things in war. And I easily say Hamas is a cancer. And if you want the body to live, you have to eradicate the cancer. That's why we do radiation and chemo, right? It's got to go. All of it. You don't peacefully coexist with cancer. You don't manage cancer, right?
Yeah.
You eliminate it. And that's what has to happen.
We had Lanny Cass on the show. She's a very
I know Lanny. I worked with her in the Pentagon for 3 years.
Yeah.
Great.
And look, people at her level, they disagree with each other a lot, right? So we can disagree with Lanny or not. I mean, I have no problem with what she says because she knows what she's talking about. And she was talking about polling of the Palestinian people and where they sit with Israel, right? And there's still a difference between like all of these people hate us from like say this line over, but they're still not all Hamas, So you can have someone that absolutely hates Israel and wants it to be gone, but is not going to take military action against them and is willing to have their own life and let the Israelis live their own life and just look at each other kind of mean. I mean that gets to be a case, but it is very hard to sort that cancer out. And for sure, at the fringes, some people are going to get killed that probably didn't deserve it, and Israel is going to go, and I keep saying this because people don't understand it, but Israel will go wherever Hamas is or wherever they think they know where somewhere Hamas is, and they are going to kill those people. They are going to like right now, it's the IDF leading the charge. Wait till the Mossad goes out and starts going into Qatar and Azerbaijan or wherever they think there is someone who's got a tie to Hamas, and they're going to smoke them.
Yeah, the leader, one of the original leaders of Hamas, as you kind of alluded to, lives in Qatar. The guy's a billionaire.
Yeah,
I tell you what, if I was a Palestinian living in Gaza, and I knew that the guy who had started the organization that's supposed to serve and protect me is living in a penthouse suite with billions of dollars, and I can't get food or water or medical care for my young daughter. We're going to have words, right? And I just don't understand why the Palestinians have not, I don't know.
Yeah.
Not my world.
Yeah. Well, and that guy sitting in Qatar, he's going to get a phone. Look, everyone in the world's going to be looking for him. And as soon as you pop your head up electronically or anything, you're going to get geolocated and they're going to find him, and it's going to cause a ruckus. What are your thoughts in general on where we're at with Ukraine and Russia? It seems like we've got an opportunity to maybe close the door on this conflict, and you hope it stays shut. These things tend to stew on way too long. But what are your thoughts?
And you think that there's an opportunity to close the door in Ukraine?
It's a winter.
I don't see that.
So you're not on that.
Okay. I would like to see that, right?
Yeah. But you don't see there. Okay. Yeah.
No. I know that their foreign minister Lavrov just spoke at the OSCE yesterday. You had somewhere in the neighborhood of half of the other foreign ministers in a 57 nation organization get up and walk out when he spoke up. Right. So that to me doesn't seem like there's too many people that are gravitating towards listening to some kind of peace agreement. Vladimir Putin is clearly stated numerous times over the past few weeks that he's ready to have a negotiation, but and that's fine. He can say that, but you've got to understand the dynamics on the other side, right? In Ukraine, you've got Zelensky, who has 80% polling support still of his people to say, dude, we want all of our land back to include Crimea. Yeah. If he goes to the negotiation table when well over damn near 80% of the people out there want to keep fighting, that's politically that's untenable for him, right? And he doesn't want to stop fighting. They want their land back. If Vladimir Putin truly wants to have a truce, it's going to have to include a discussion of giving back some of the land that they took, because again, you go back to the 1990-ish Budapest Memorandum, where the president of Russia signed it and said, forever and a day, we will recognize Ukraine's existing borders of the 90s as long as they give up their nuclear weapons. And they did. They surrendered. And not only they give them up, they gave them all to Russia, right? So Russia got all the nuclear weapons. It's the future is a funny place, right? Because I guarantee that when that memorandum was signed and there were four parties, right? It was President Bill Clinton, the prime minister of the UK, it was the leader of Ukraine, and then the leader of Russia. I guarantee the leader of Ukraine was sitting there thinking, man, I'm so grateful that the United States and the UK are not going to invade us, because that's, Russia's my brother. They will never invade us, right? Back in the 90s. And now future's a strange bedfellow, man. Yes, right. So now it's completely turned. So yeah, I don't see an opportunity for the end. I think we're going to go into a long winter. I think that F-16s, I don't know how much research you've done, but I've written a lot of articles on F-16s. They've been published in the BBC, Kyiv Post, The Hill. Yep. So I'm a big advocate. F-16s should have been there long ago. This was not a resource constrained. This was not funding constrained. This was politically constrained. The Biden administration, for whatever reason, Jake Sullivan was very apprehensive to send F-16s. We're finally there. So that's great. And they should be rolling in sometime in the spring. I think that's going to be I won't say it's the Wunderwaffen. It's not the wonder weapon that's going to save Ukraine, but it's going to make a significant impact. Yeah.
Some of that hesitation from the people that I know and the things that I know, and again, this can be argued also, but was the amount of corruption that Ukraine was demanding that to go with those airplanes. And there's a lot of money that comes with those things, right? Service packages and everything else, but they wanted cream on top of the cream. And we just weren't going to do it. And let's also be honest about this too. We don't want Ukraine too powerful. We want that. We're okay with the stalemate. And whether Ukraine wants it or not, it's going to be the U.S. and Russia sitting at that table at a minimum. And Ukraine is going to have to figure out who they're partnering with. And that means either way, they're going to lose some land somewhere. I think we all can agree on that. So I don't know. So this is where I'm like, we're running out of political capital here. We have elections coming up, and a lot of people are going to run on no more of this multi-$100 billion packages going to Ukraine. So I just see that there being a waning support. And now we have this other conflict in the Mideast, and it's like we got a new girlfriend who's got bigger boobs, and we're like, wow, we really like Israel. So I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong on this. I'm glad to be wrong, but we are an interesting partner. I'm being nice right now because we will turn our back on you in a second. Ask the Kurds, ask the Afghans. We will be like, what? No, we left. It's like poof. So I don't know, man. I don't know what's going to happen. I think what you're saying is completely plausible. And like you said, the future's weird because the next thing smash cut to, our greatest allies, China, and that doesn't seem possible today.
Yeah. It's not just the United States though, right? You make a good point here, right? You've got European leaders, and you've got this ultra-right movement that is gaining ground. Orban in Hungary has scared a lot of people for a couple of years, but holy cow, we just had an election in the Netherlands, and you got a guy who ran and won on a very conservative platform that does not support Ukraine, and it's actually Dutch F-16s that are supposed to be going to Ukraine. So I guess if you're Ukraine, the good news is that he's having a really hard time struggling to form a government. European governments are very different than U.S. governments, right? You've got to form coalitions, and you have to get over 50%, and it's really kooky nutty, right? And there's multiple parties, and it's you've got to have a whole graduate level degree to understand politics in Europe. So, and each one's a little different. But my point is there's this growing, and it's not just about Ukraine, right? It's about a lot of the things that the liberal parties of Europe, right? Where, look, we're just going to tax the bejesus out of you, but we're going to give you everything. You're going to have, unlimited health care. You're going to have wonderful roads. You're going to have, great retirements. You're going to have all these wonderful things, and we're going to have tons of immigration. We're just going to keep bringing people because we care, right? It's the touchy-feely heart thing. We're going to let all these Syrians in and all these Afghans, and Europe's having some serious problems right now, right? For Austria, where I'm at, because they also have a far right movement that's growing. They had the high water mark, if you will, or the turning point was there was a Syrian refugee in Salzburg, and he raped a little Salzburger boy in a public bathroom at a pool. And when he was arrested and taken in, and he was read his charges, it's like, what did I do wrong? Like this is what we do in Syria. Like I'm allowed to touch little boys, right? No. And the culture class was just so significant. People realized none of these refugees we brought in want to assimilate to the European constructs. They just want the money that we give them, and they want, and some of it gets sent back to places that the Europeans don't want the money being sent to, right? Or people and entities that they don't want the money sent to. So you've got enough's enough. Healthcare's falling apart over here. It's really ugly.
Yeah, it's tough to manage. There's a Finnish, I guess he might be a general by now, but a Finnish general professor that I know named Jüri Ratasalo, and he said a brilliant thing to me that, as an American, I'm like, oh, I never even thought about that. He said, Pete, there are many Europes. And I was like, oh my God, there is. That's so true. Like Eastern Europe is vastly different than, say, Northern Europe, which is vastly different than Southern Europe. And then you could get smaller and just go at the national, like little enclaves, like the Benelux is completely different than Romania. Like these things don't go together at all. And their interests change. And all of the countries that border against Russia, the Baltics, Finland, they have, their needs are completely different than, say, Portugal, who's on, or Malta. How different is Malta than all of the rest of Europe? It's mind blowing. And we have, look, I'm going to shut up here in a second, but we have a similar thing here where Alabama needs military contracts to keep that Gulf Coast healthy and everything else. But it's not the same as North Dakota, which is not the same as Washington. But I think it's even more distinct because the cultures and the languages are so different. And Europe is, approximately the same size as the U.S.
Yeah. Look, it's a matter of where you sit, right? I live in Europe, and I realize there's a bunch of Europes, and I don't forget it. But, it's funny. I would argue to a European, there's many Americans. Yeah. Just hear me out for a second, right? I was in a pub in downtown Vienna, and a somewhat liberal individual was yelling at some of our Republican governors that are on the border, and saying, "Look, these idiots are busing illegal immigrants up to New York and other places and into DC, and why are they doing that? That's ridiculous." And I said, "Look, New York has a very different philosophy in this with sanctuary cities, and they can do that because there's not a illegal border on the southern border of New York, right? It's on the border of Texas, and so it doesn't have the same concerns or feelings or blah blah blah." So when you start explaining to that, I'm like, look, as you said, Finland has a very different perspective on Russia than Malta or Portugal, but every American sits there and says, "Oh, Europe is right next door to Russia."
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Continent wise, not nation wise. Yeah.
It's true. And Portugal, we'll just use them as our example. They have to be like, no, we love Russian energy. Russians are great for us. They help us be successful. It's a great point. And just using your example of Texas v. New York, if the federal government creates a immigration policy, but does not provision it, but New York's like, hey, come on up. We're welcome. Yes, there's a political thing going on, but it's like, oh, you good. This is Del Rio, Texas. We're not provisioned for this. We don't, we are things we can't even get to with our own budget money because we've got this national crisis that's here. Yeah. So, I talked to the judge that runs their emergency response down there, and he's like, yeah, I send people to San Antonio because San Antonio is way bigger than I am, and I have to get them out of here. I don't have anywhere to put them. So I know that, their government doesn't like it. This is within Texas. He's like, but I don't have a choice. I can't, I'm not set up to do this. No one's paying for it, and we're not peopled for it. So yeah, here they come to New York, to California, wherever it's going to be. And I get there's the political thing, and that's that's a different thing. But you guys said you want this, here you go. We can't handle it, right? And nothing's changing. And again, bring in Abbott and Biden, who don't want to work together. And so these things get complicated. And that absolutely happens in Europe. I mean, absolutely, that's the same kind of thing.
Yeah. Imagine, and this is where it gets wacky nutty, right? Where you almost have to like do illicit drugs to be able to pay attention and get it all. Is at least the United States has a common fiscal policy, right? We have one federal budget. The European nations that have joined the European Union, right? So they've tried to create their equivalent where they can gain economic power through a single vehicle relative to the size of the United States. Yeah. Each one has its own fiscal policy. It'd be like giving the state all the federal money that comes in, right? Can you imagine if all the federal taxes in Texas were collected in Texas and then sent to the Texas governor?
Yeah.
Right. And he only had to give like maybe 2% of that to Washington, D.C. We'd be a really different country.
Oh, yeah. You talk about not getting along. Yeah. It's crazy. So let's transition away from that. We've covered a lot of ground, and I appreciate you kind of surveying these things with me because they're topical, they're current events, and we need folks like us to have these conversations because we've been in rooms where very smart people disagree dramatically on which way to go, and you see that and you start to learn like, man, there's more than one way to skin this cat. They probably equally don't work and work. Well, let's just pick this option and we can get pretty comfortable with that. And I appreciate you going through that exercise with me. Let's talk about writing though. And the ability to put your finger squarely on the pulse, slide it up the line a little bit and go, I'm right about this. Because you can write with very clear, look, the future's a weird place, but you can see it.
Yeah. So I've been given a gift. You talked earlier about having a bunch of degrees in the room. Well, the Air Force paid to send me to get 3 master's degrees, right? So I didn't get the PhD. I got the trifecta and masters. And I wrote a lot, right? I wrote position papers for ambassadors and generals. And I as I moved away from the military, I kind of leveraged that knowledge and I realized I wanted to write books. And it's really funny, kind of real quick story, right? My wife and I of many years decided that when we retired, we're going to go travel the world. It's like everybody. And the first month into our retirement, she says, "You're not gonna," and we never had kids, wanted to, just didn't work out. And she's like, "You're not gonna believe this, I'm pregnant." So at 52, I was going to be a first time dad, and I thought, there's going to come a time where my kid's going to be a teen and he's not going to want to listen to me, just like I didn't want to listen to my dad. And after that, I might not be around. So I want to give him something as a gift to say, hey, I want to read about who my dad was. It was kind of how it started. So I started realizing I wanted to write fiction thrillers and I wanted to talk about my career. My first choice was actually to just write autobiographies. And I realized when we held clearances like you and I held in the human and in the intelligence world, I was never gonna get these books approved by DOD to ever be released. So I said, well, if I make it fiction, right, then it's fiction, but it's not really fiction, right? So it's about as real as fiction gets, is my tagline. And I started. I had a protagonist. His name was Dr. Kurt Nover. He's a former SEAL. Wanted to fight for his country after September 11th. Joined the Navy. Became a SEAL. Did a lot of killing. Saw a lot of bad things. It mentally hurt him. He suffers from PTSD, as do I. The dog that you see me petting and jumping around here the whole time is my service dog, because he knows that I'm a little bit anxious when I do these types of things, and she's trying to calm me down. But and the book doesn't hide any of it, right? It talks about the PTSD struggles that Kurt has. All the while he's, and by the way, the reason he became a doctor is he wants to go do good in the world. He's done enough hurting. Now he wants to go do good. That's the premise of the original book. He went out and basically unearthed the fact that there was a covert mercenary organization that the United States government was funding. And he said, dude, this is wrong. We can't do this. This is beyond the laws of armed conflict. So he tries to expose it. As you can imagine, when you try to expose something like that, people don't like it. So he's on a run for his life. And the name of the book's called Live Range. It's available on Amazon globally. But I shared it with my friends, right? And I didn't expect it to do as good as it did. I just shared it with my friends, and after they read it, they're like, "Hey, what happens to Kurt?" Well, what do you mean? What happens? The book's over. I'm like, well, no, you got to make this into a series. So the next one that came out was Balkan Reprisal. It's about a fictitious war in the Balkans. I flew in 1999 in the Balkan Wars. I also was the defense attaché to Kosovo for 2 years. So you can imagine Balkan Reprisal is very realistic because I spent a lot of time there. As you and I met, we met through my third book, right, which is called Afghan Ghosts, and that's from my time serving on the ground as the equivalent of a battalion commander, as a provincial reconstruction team commander. And the idea of that one is the president of the United States rapidly makes a decision to withdraw all U.S. forces. Again, it's fiction, right? So, and Kurt and his friends decide that, hey, there were some interpreters back there and people that they really care about that are going to get killed by the Taliban. So the book is about Kurt and his friends going back in to get out those that they cared about, that they served with. The funny thing is there's movies about this coming out right now. I don't know if you've seen any of them, right? Yeah. But there's a lot of movies. And I keep joking. I'm like, I started my book before you guys published those movies. But then the last one, and the reason we're kind of doing this, right, is a kind of a pitch. So in 4 days, my fourth book in the series will come out called The Russian Puppeteer. It is about a fictitious war between Ukraine and Russia. Look, there's tons of stuff in the media about F-16s and about tanks and bombs. This book looks at it more through the eyes of diplomacy and to a large degree dirty diplomacy, right? And the intelligence and covert operations and the things that nations can do to each other well beyond the battle space to inflict harm onto other nations. And I was blessed because General Breedlove, who's the EUCOM commander from 2013 to 2016, so he was there when the original Crimea invasion came in. He found out about my book and he asked to write the foreword. So the foreword is from General Breedlove, right? And it's awesome. There's a couple quotes on my social media out there if anyone wants to grab them, but when you got a rock star like that coming in who's wanting to write your foreword and he loves the book, right? He's like, he's like, how do I get your first three? I got to find out how Kurt got it, right? So it's and he's not just some small guy, right? So that's pretty cool.
It's interesting. I've had a bunch of your peers on this show, Andrews and Wilson. I'm looking at their book right here, but there's so many of them that we get to write, and Clancy had to go grab a whole bunch of Jane's manuals and get himself into trouble for releasing classified information. He's like, it's all publicly available, but tradecraft and all these things. But now, like if I decided to start writing a series of thrillers based on espionage or whatever, I could do that, and nobody's gonna have more reality in terms of like doing what I did on the ground and throwing that into a thriller segment. I mean, you might be a more imaginative person, but I can put the grit in there because I've had the grit in my mouth, right? And you can do the same thing where you have this career, and this is so military too. You're like, air, land, and sea. Next thing you know, you're going to send you up into space, and you'll check that off the list. And you've worked on the diplomat side, and we do get to see these things, and we have not an innate but a developed sense of how these things work. And like my friends will say, do you think the CIA does this and it's a bad thing? And I'm like, the next time the CIA does a bad thing, it won't be the first or last. So you're right to be suspicious of the CIA. And we can write about why you should be suspicious of the CIA because we've seen the things that they do. Look, I'm hard on PRTs because you guys had an impossible job and not everybody did all that great at it. And here we look at Afghanistan, it's like, oh man, because we've done these things. And so we can write about it better than someone in reality. And I love that you guys are all out there creating all this body of work. So one, thanks for doing that. And I'm so happy that you're having success with it too, because it's hard. It's easy to write a book and have no one read it, but to get someone to pick it up, and say, "Let me write the foreword," man, that says something.
Yeah, I'm critical of PRTs as well, and I was a PRT commander, right? But But I'm gonna tell you my quick PRT story, right? So
please.
So I was the PRT commander of a place called Bob Logman. It was in a region called Kalad in the city of Zabul, down next to Kandahar, right? And if anyone knows anything about old history, the oldest and the most eastern castle built and palace built by Alexander the Great is there in the city, right? So Alexander the Great, at 18 years of age, he'd conquered all over Europe. He'd gotten all the way to Afghanistan, and he sent his recon teams into the Hindu Kush and said, okay, come on, we're going to conquer the world, man. Let's go. And as all of his recon teams came back and said, boss, there's nothing out there. Like, this is the most barren, desolate, horrible place in the world. I think it's the end of the earth. And Alexander the Great, at 18 years of age, said in the palace that I looked at, watch the sunset behind it every night, said, this isn't worth conquering. There's nothing more here. I've conquered the world. And he turned around and went home. And at 18 years of age, a North Macedonian / Greek / Albanian, whatever you want to call him, right? Because they all fight over him because of his greatness. He could make the right decision, but empires like the British Empire or the Russian Empire or the U.S. Empire, with supposedly the brilliance of PhDs and experts, said, I think we can do it. Right? It was the most infuriating thing every night to watch. Like, the 18-year-old kid got it right. And we couldn't, right? So, yeah.
Small world, by the way. I'm going to say something, but 3,000 miles from North Macedonia, he's out there and that's the edge of the world. That's pretty damn good for an 18-year-old. I don't know about, when my kid was 18, she couldn't turn. I'm like, will you please turn in your final assignment so you can go to, graduate high school? And she's like, all right, I'll do it,
Yeah.
But, I worked in Zabul. I've been on Fob Logman. I've been on Fob Smart and been out in those villages and towns. And it is a very complex place. And when I'm critical of the PRTs, that's all I understand. As the spy sitting in the room, Mullah Omar was sitting 2 miles from any of these camps at any point in time. I never found that out, So,
but every guy in a black robe in the little village, every one of them knew. But they were never going to tell you.
Yeah.
Right. So you
absolutely. Right. Yeah.
You drive your Humvee by, your up armored Humvee, and they all look at you. And you're just like, man, if I could just climb in your brain for like 5 minutes, I could end all this.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And so as good at networking and collecting as I am, here's the prize of the entire thing, and I no idea. I also don't focus on that part of it. That will happen if it's going to happen, but it's not even a needle in a haystack. It's too precious, and they don't just give that up. But it's funny. So whenever I'm critical, I always remember that like, hey, I didn't win either. We all had our challenges with that. So I don't want to get too distracted, but I wanted to let you know that, hey, I worked in Zabul also, and a very tough
That's awesome.
place. By the way, Barbara is chiming in, and she's excited to discover your books. PRTs are provincial reconstruction teams, and they would focus on really like the non-lethal aspects. And I'm being very general here, but they would work on like helping with the governance and that kind of stuff.
Governance, security, and reconstruction.
What years were you there?
2007 to 8.
Okay. It's interesting. One of the things that I learned along the way was because my job is to help the commanders win and lose less. And so when I got there, I realized that Route Chicken, this is for everybody who's watching, it's just a road to a further place from the middle of nowhere. So it's further out in the middle of nowhere. But we continued to open that up, and we'd take pictures and capture it and put it on the wall. And so I had learned in Iraq, like, if you look 3 or 4 or 5 units back, you can start to go, hey, we've already opened Route Chicken. Let's do it again. But I don't know. Can we try something else? And we hate that. Jeff, I got to tell you, I have to go to major and above to say this, and I had to say it very carefully. Like, I'm glad to work on this with you. Here are the last 3 slide decks from the last 3 units who opened Route Chicken. I'm using Route Chicken as an example. And boy, the boss wants to know that, but it has to be delivered in a way where the boss can go, you know what? You're right. He's always a Texan when I do my thing. You're right. We don't want to do a pile of shit. We need to do one thing right. And it's invaluable. And it's like the gauze comes off the eyes, and you're like, oh my God, I can see. We should really try to do this right and really do less. And if we can get Route Chicken open and pass that along to the next PRT and the command unit that's there, maybe, just maybe, that one thing will hold. But we never did.
Yeah. And look, I fell victim of this too, as kind of a leader, right? I would send my teams out to meet with the locals on a regular basis. And on occasion, I would meet with my counterparts, the governor at my level. And then I'd have to go brief the division commander down in RC South, right, in Kandahar, because he had 4 PRTs in his division, and he wanted to talk to us on every week. So I pulled me aside, says, hey, Fish, man, this this ring road that we built. And for those who don't know, there's like one highway. It's Ring Road 1. It's just one big road, and it's not a highway. It's really a 2-lane road, but it's paved, which is a big deal for Afghanistan.
Yeah.
He's like, I want to be able to have some metrics to show that this thing is getting more and more use, and that we're really kind of, that I want a good news story. Okay, boss. So how do you want me to do? Do you want me to count cars? what do you want me to do?
Yeah.
He's like, well, I don't know. He's like, why don't you go to the gas stations and see, how much gas they're selling, and do a calculation, which to all of us seems, as Western-minded people, hey,
Yes.
if you're selling more gas, there's more cars, right?
That's
There's more
right.
traffic. Good.
Yep.
So here's where that fallacy breaks down in places where you have such culture clash and you don't understand the culture you're in, where this falls apart. So I go into the first gas station. I meet Ahmed, the owner. I say, Ahmed, how many gallons of gas did you sell last week? Right? I sold, 500 gallons. Oh, great. That's great. Right. Good. So you drive a little bit down the road and you come across, Bukdar. Hey, Bukdar, how many gallons of gas did you sell? Were you just at a med store? I heard you were at a med store. Yeah, I was at a med store. How much did a med say? That's not important. Right? How much did Well, it doesn't matter. No, if you don't tell me, I won't tell you. Okay, Ahmed says he sold 500. Well, I sold 600. Do you have receipts? But if you can't prove their lies are wrong, they're never lies in the Afghan culture, right?
That's right.
So this was the dumbest thing in the world, but we all had to build this. And at the end of the day, it was information that was completely fabricated, right? That was going to be presented to prime minister level and presidents to say, look at how much more traffic is going on the ring road. And by the time we got done, right, someone did the math and said, dude, if there was literally this many cars driving through Zabul province, we would have been bumper to bumper traffic for a month straight. Like, that's impossible for that much gasoline to be used. So it was just, and finally the 2-star got it right. But he's like nothing here. He's like, and it's in my third book. It's like, everything in Afghanistan is easy. Nothing's simple. Right. Yeah. It's so hard.
It's so hard. So a couple things that are along those lines. When I was there, I moved around because that's my job, and I was in Shajoy, which for everybody, it's to the east. It's the main city in this province, in this state. And we were working with the Romanians who owned that battle space right there. And we would go into town, and the Afghans, because I'm good at building trust, right? I'm good at something. And they're like, hey, you want a problem to solve? Get those Russians to stop killing us with their vehicles. And I'm like, do tell. And they're like, well, the Russians drive around and they drive over people, and they're just, they are entirely too rough. And this is not one data point. This is like independent data points. And I'm not collecting this. This is falling in my lap. And I go, all right, let me look into this. And so they met the Romanians, but the Romanians look and act like Russians to them. And so
and drove BTR-80s.
Right. Exactly.
It was
right.
the easiest thing for the Taliban to do. Is like, hey, you guys, guess what? The Russians are back. Look, same vehicles.
Yep. Yeah, it worked, right? And it worked. And so we didn't know how to even deal with that. And the Romanians are like, we're not driving over people. I'm like, that doesn't matter, man. And I'm always big on affect over effect. So like, you're an Air Force guy, like, the battle damage assessment. Like, yeah, well, did you go there? Did you ask anybody? Because I guarantee you, what you think happened, that ain't what happened. And even if that is not real. So this will drive you crazy. When I was in Tuatha in Iraq, the locals there would say, who blew up this nuclear power plant? It was the Iranians. And you're like, no, it was the Israelis. And they're like, nope, it was the Iranians. And it didn't matter what you said. It's a big lesson for me. I was like, that's true here, and I don't know why, and I don't know what, but it informed me to go, oh, wow, when they say something, I have to figure out if it's true to them. And if it is, and if it's like a multiple community kind of thing, like, that's real here. Doesn't matter what we think is real. And the more you could do that, the more you could give that to the boss. It's like, I know you're going to reject this. However, this is real here, Yeah.
Afghanistan was, and there's just so many I mean, we could probably tell war stories after war stories back and forth.
Yeah.
And you know, if you, as you know, on Fob Lagman, there was a helicopter pad, right? They do refueling for the Chinooks that would do the ring for the people who are listening, right? So the Chinooks would take off out of Kandahar with a load, and they would just go from base to base to base to base to base, and they would pick up and drop off people, and it was kind of like the bus route in the air, because we had IEDs on the ground. We didn't want to send people around, right? But some Army captain created what the priority was for who could get on the bus and who couldn't get on the bus, right? And it was obviously active duty soldiers going on mission were number one. Active duty soldiers going on leave was number two. And then, you know, it went down the line to GSs and blah, 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 and this and that. Well, the one of the last ones was contractors. If you're a contractor in Afghanistan, you're like the last guy, right? And it was the middle of summer. We're in Zabul province, and I had 3 of my hooches where my guys were living with the air conditioning doesn't work. And here, you know, is a KBR air conditioning guy stuck on Kandahar, and he just doesn't have priority. He can't get on the bus, right? And but my base was a refueling point. So I finally told the Romanian who was managing my air said, hey, when Kandahar calls and asks what our weather is, I need you to tell him it's 0-0. In other words, 0 visibility, 0 ceiling. We're fogged in, can't see jack. He's like, sir, it's a clear day. It's the sun's out.
Okay.
Like, no, it's not. Shut up. Yeah. So he reports 0-0, which means the bus can't go today because the bus can't make the route without refueling at my base. So the captain calls and talks to the Romanian and says, how are you reporting 0-0? We're looking at the weather, and the weather here says it's clear to Milligan. And he says, you need to talk to the base command. So he gets on the phone. He's like, hey, your weather's it's horrible here. Horrible. And he goes, sir, are you going to question Lieutenant Colonel? No, sir, not at all. I'm just like, you know, I bet the weather would get really good if you would put those 3 contracting guys on so that I can get air conditioning. Because I've lost missions. I'm losing missions because my guys can't sleep at night. And I'm not going to send guys out falling asleep behind a 50 cal up in a gun turret and risk my guys' lives. I'm just not going to do that. That's right. I'll cancel missions before I risk my dudes' lives. And he's like, okay, let me talk to my boss. So his 05 and me 05, right? Two lieutenant colonels had a discussion, and magically those 3 guys were on the next Chinook that went around, and magically the weather cleared up amazingly fast at Bob Lagman. But you know, I millions of stories like this, right? You give someone an ounce of power and let them create some kind of priority list that really takes. It does nothing to take into effect combat capability and operational capability. It's hey, I made a list. Look at the power that I have. Bob, it drives me crazy.
And I got to say, and then we'll wrap this thing up, but I got to say too, it's hot in Zabul. So if your guys are trying to sleep in a metal box, which is probably what they lived in, you can't. It's going to be over 120 degrees in that thing, you know. And so when you say AC, it's part of the ways how we survive and how we keep maintaining our op tempo. You know, you have to have it. There are places where you don't get it, and then you're like, man, I cannot wait to get back, because you're completely worn out from dealing with the heat. Because the Afghans have a different setup and how they deal with it. So I wanted to make sure I said that because it's such a great point. Okay, so. Thanks for coming on the show. Everybody who's going to support you, here's the link for Live Range if you want to start from the beginning, and that link is down below. You know, I always say, buddy, buy 2 and read it with somebody else. I'll read it with you if you guys want. And then here is the next book coming up, Russian Puppeteer. The link again down below my face. And look, Jeff is a good dude, smart. I love having you on the show. I find myself in Vienna now somewhat regularly for some work that I'm doing. So we'll have to get together and do a face-to-face. But I want to let you close out. Is there anything you want to say before we wrap it up?
Yeah. First of all, I want to say thanks, right? Great opportunity. And I love chatting with you. And if you do make it to Vienna, we'll link up, right? Vienna is an interesting city for people like us. It's one of the top 3 cities for espionage in the world. And that's well documented because it has multiple international entities. You know, you talked about realism in books and people who've been there, done that. I had 2 not U.S., other nations that were friends of mine, other defense attaches who fell for honey traps here, right? So when I write my books, write stories about honey traps, I'm writing not from first person, but from second person, right? So I know how it devastates a family. I know how it's set up. I realize that. And I'll leave you with this, right? So I'll leave a little bit of teaser with Russian puppeteers. So when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014, I was the senior military advisor to the chairman at the OSCE. And so the OSCE was the organization that was kind of responsible for security. So it was my ambassador at the OSCE. It was the Ukrainian Ambassador Jeff Pyatt, and then EUCOM commander, General Breedlove, and then the White House, right? And obviously that. So every other day I was on White House VTCs listening to how senior leaders, both military elected and politically appointed leaders, were trying to figure out what the United States was going to do. So when you read Russian Puppeteer and you go, there's no way a senior politician is going to do something like that, I can assure you that, that things like this happen. And your jaw will drop every now and then. And that's a good thing, because I think people having insights on how their government works really is, it's better for our country.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it, man. I appreciate you coming on. I'm going to run the credits here, and I'll just hang on and I'll say goodbye to you.
Sure.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated